for tuning into another episode of TA Tech Unboxed, where in each episode we're chatting to the people behind the products and tools that are built for the TA and HR communities. If you're listening to this, if you jump over to our YouTube channel, and I'll put a link in the description for this episode, you'll be able to see an unboxing of the tool of the guest of this episode. I'm Chris Haslam, and I'm here with my co-host, Mr. Darren Bush. Mr. Darren Bush, how are you?
I'm very well. Very well, thanks, Chris. How are you?
Good. Great trip to Japan. Fully rested. Shrined and walked out. But bar that, you've also had a holiday since our last episode. How was that?
Yeah, it was amazing. It was actually a proper holiday as well. So
nice.
Previously,
switch off.
Previously I hadn't had much of a holiday.
Wonderful.
Especially when you go away with kids. Yeah, you don't really get to switch off.
And who do we have on this week's show, Darren?
So, Chris, we've got Hugh Fordham, who's over 20 years' experience in HR and recruitment technology from the early days of applicant tracking systems to his current venture, Hollaroo, which was founded in 2009. Hollaroo is sometimes described as a third-generation CRM or a combination of HubSpot and LinkedIn. And as they begin their next chapter, Hugh is focused on how rich engagement data can be combined with machine learning to benefit candidates and recruiters alike. Welcome to the show, Hugh.
Hello, sir.
Let's start with, first of all, your intriguing background. Can you tell us your journey and how you got into TA?
Oh, crikey. That takes me a long way back. And and every time I talk about this, it betrays my age. I'm actually an engineer by training, did various different jobs, but ended up with a company called Schlumberger, which is an oil and gas service company. Global company. I was doing design work in Paris. I was working on oil rigs in Vietnam and China. And they're a slightly strange organization in that they hire just engineers and then get the engineers to do all the other jobs. So at some point they said, Hugh, would you like to be the head of recruitment in the UK? And that's how I got into recruitment. And then how I got into recruitment technology is at the time, some of our suppliers were working on, early stage applicant tracking systems and job boards and the like. It was .com boom time, and one of the companies floated, raised huge amounts of money, as everybody did at the time, and came to me and said, would I like to get on board? So that's how I got into recruitment technology.
Yeah, I'm not surprised you jumped at that chance. I mean,
yeah. I mean, it's an interesting old thing, and absolutely would. If you had asked me when I graduated, would I get into recruitment? Again, betraying my age. I mean, it was early stage of information technology back at that time, so would I get involved in software either? Probably wouldn't have dreamt it. But
I don't think anyone I've ever met has said at school, what are you going to do when you get older? And they start, I think isn't that one of the great reasons why talent acquisition and recruiting is got so many diverse minds?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like, you're an engineer, right? I like the fact that Schlumberger has got Schlumberger as well.
It's a joke because it's a French company. So in France, it's Schlumberger. But you go everywhere in the world and the pronunciation is completely different.
I prepared the whole call for Schlumberger, and now Schlumberger
I'm keeping that.
And a very interesting company to recruit for. So it's mainly focused on graduate recruitment. And the most, whenever I went to a campus or what have you, first question is, has anybody heard of Schlumberger? However you want to pronounce it. And nobody had heard of them. And I said, okay, well, we make, I think at the time it was something like $12 billion a year. We're 100,000 people. It's a massive organization, which nobody's heard of.
And they were all engineering folks. You were all engineering, no matter what. So graduate scheme is bringing engineers. We'll take the best.
So the main roles were technical roles, sort of two types. A smaller part was in the research and development area, but the main focus was literally people to go out into the world, work on oil rigs, basically using Schlumberger equipment to help oil companies find oil, basically.
So you're at Schlumberger, and then you joined a couple of other companies as well, worked in and around the ATS market. What made you set up Hollaroo in 2009?
Oh, another long story. Yes, so I worked on a few different applicant tracking systems. My last sort of real job, if you like, was with Stepstone, and I was there responsible for their job board technology, their applicant tracking technology, their performance management technology. So all these different types of technology. And if I'm honest, I was a bit frustrated because the early vision of the applicant tracking system hadn't really transpired. So that was, once you had a place to put all of the people who are potentially interested in you as an organization, you'd never have to talk to a recruitment agent or advertise any jobs ever again. You could just do it all yourself.
They all promised that.
I remember the era. It was like they were talking about disintermediation was the thing,
Yeah.
job boards as well in the middle. You didn't need the agencies. It was completely going to cut it out.
And the principle's correct in the sense of what it, as you say, what is it? Disintermediation. So basically removing the middlemen, letting organisations talk directly to people. And in theory, absolutely, once you start talking to people, you can keep in touch with them and hire them. I think the issue was that organizations didn't realize they needed to talk to people, and they thought just having somebody's details in the database was sufficient. It's not, because A, the data's out of date, B, you've got no idea whether that person's actually looking for a job at any point in time, and that person has, if they've been ignored for 5 years and you suddenly get back in touch with them, it's very unlikely that they're going to respond. And I think one of the reasons why the intermediaries, if you like, have remained is that what they're exceptionally good at is maintaining those relationships and that understanding of people and being able to do that matching of the person into a role. That's the value that they add. So there's a bit of frustration built from that, and then simultaneously that was the time when Facebook, LinkedIn, all of the social networks were booming and showing this real appetite for connecting and sharing and communicating and basically using your networks to communicate and get value, if you like. And I think one of the interesting things that I thought is, as an organization, if I think about a big organization, let's say Schlumberger, you as an organization have these huge networks of people, and you can build communities of people who are suppliers, who are people interested in working for you, sources of knowledge, doesn't really matter what. Why on earth are these organizations taking all that value and giving it away to LinkedIn and Facebook and the public networks? So the idea behind Hollaroo was, could we build something that would allow these organizations to capture all of that value and actually retain it for themselves rather than give it away? So that was sort of the starting point of the organization. Plus, from a technical perspective, it was quite interesting to sort of start with a blank sheet of paper and build something new.
I don't want to go too deep into because we're going to talk about in a minute the product and stuff, but can you unpack the definition of community? Because I feel like we all have a different understanding of what that means.
It's really interesting, actually. It's the difference between networks and communities. So broadly, social networks are people that know each other. Communities tend to be people with a shared interest. And in the context of an organization, they have multiple communities because the set of people who are potentially interested in working for you are different from the set of people who want to do business with you, are different from the set of people who are a source of knowledge for you, are different from the people who have worked with you in the past. There's all these different communities. So one of the things we obviously had to think about when we were building the platform is, if you want to manage all these different communities in the same space, you've got to have quite granular control of the user experience and the security rules about who can see who and who can do what, because the user experience for a business contact will be completely different from the user experience of a candidate. So we had to sort of think of all that and build that all into the platform to begin with.
Fascinating. and clever, right? It's like, I think when the definitions come down, you start thinking about the differentiators between the two, you're able to then zero in on
Yeah,
what.
and it's really interesting from a specifically from a recruitment context, because there's overlap. So if you have a community of, let's say, your employees, and you've got a community of your candidates, your employees will know some of the candidates, or will know people who could be some of the candidates, and that's how employee referrals work. Employee referrals works on individual connections, which then you use to build your community, and then potentially from the community you can help people build up their networks as well. So there's lots of fluidity between the two, but yeah, I find it
And
very
is that
interesting.
that's what you're trying to achieve with Hollaroo, right? It's like the ownership of those communities, not networks. And
Yeah. And it's basically, if you like, the starting point is, communities, networks, really interesting. Obviously being a business, you then have to sort of think, okay, what's the value within those communities, and how can you help organizations get most value out of them? And that tends to be different for different communities. So, your candidates, obviously, you want to get them interested in you as an organization. You want to get them applying for roles. If they're employees, you want to retain them and keep them interested in the organisation, and keep them aware of future opportunities for themselves. But an employee community can be much more relaxed about them seeing each other and talking to each other and getting to know each other. Whereas quite often with your candidates, you actually need to lock it down a bit, because especially with experienced hire communities, it's you don't necessarily want your boss to be able to see that you're in a talent community for another organisation. So yeah, different rules for different sets of people.
or accidentally bump into your boss inside the same community. I can imagine that's super
Exactly.
awkward.
So we have again, in the sort of security layers, you can anonymize communities and basically control who can see who.
Interesting.
Should we talk about where Hollaroo starts and where does it end? Because you've obviously evolved the products. We talked about the communities as the starting point. You've added a few more modules as we've gone along.
Yeah, and it's evolved over time, because the concept of building relationships, maintaining relationships, developing networks holds, we think, throughout the entire candidate journey. So literally, you could start with somebody who's interested in working with you, goes through the selection process, onboards into the organisation, becomes an employee, and potentially leaves. Because I think one of the things that's really important is if you can, the first thing is, if you can keep that relationship going no matter where somebody is on that journey, there's continuity from the point of view of the candidate, and you're retaining that connection. And I think it's especially when somebody leaves the organisation, if you can keep the connection going and retain that relationship and handle it in a positive fashion, everybody knows, those people may come back and work with you again in the future. Or if you can send them out into the world as your brand advocates and, ambassadors for the organisation, they'll be a fantastic source of other talent for you as well.
I also think that's a hidden weapon, isn't it, of TA, right? It's like the army of referrers that you create when anyone interacts with your brand, whether they be an employee, whether they just have a great experience with you, whether they've been with you and really enjoyed it. We should be trying to do everything we can to make sure that experience has a referrer mindset, or the agenda is get a referral, right? It's all well and good they saying I had a really good experience working with you, but did they actually go into the market and say, actually, I had a really great time there? I always think, like, while we've been building Move, those that leave, I want them to say, Move was a great place to work, you should apply there, is the number one priority. And I will do everything in my power to facilitate those that do that, because that means they had a great experience with us. That means they trust us. That means that while they were here, all the great feedback they were giving us was real. So you're able to revalidate, right? So it's awesome that you could do that. You've got a mechanism for doing that for companies. I think that's
I think it was Hollaroo was the first company I came across 4 years ago. That's how we got to know each other. Where I'd seen in my head, I believed that whenever a candidate applied, they'll go through a candidate portal. I think Hollaroo was one of the first people I'd seen had a candidate portal. Most people don't have that, just have the career site. Then they do a pre-boarding, and then they go to a new portal, and then they were obviously an employee, and then they're in the employee system, and then when they've left, they had another one for alumni, and there was the ability to sort of connect them all, and that referral part of the process, and making sure there's always a place dedicated for them. So
Yeah, I was
go
going to
in.
say, by nature, it drives you then, doesn't it? You now have to make sure that everyone's experience with you is, because they all become referees. What's the marketing term for that? It's not referee, is it? It's at the end of the marketing flywheel. There's a term where they put back in at the top. Those people become, it's like a referrer, a tractor or something like that, isn't it? Yeah. I find it super interesting, and I agree. Like, there aren't many services that like full life cycle talent.
And it's a different way of looking at things, because lots of people think of people based on what they are at any particular point in time. So lots of people invest huge amounts into their employees, for example, and they give them these lovely tools and what have you. But as someone I was talking to pointed out, in 4 years' time, half of them won't be employees anymore. So you've basically invested all this money in them and then thrown it away. So if you instead, you can say, we're interested in you as a person. We understand that your needs will change over time. You'll potentially move or what have you, but we just want to stay in touch.
You want to be mutual.
It's much more efficient, isn't it?
Yeah. You want to be mutual by treating people. You basically treat people like adults, aren't you? You're basically saying, like, we're going to coach you and train you and spend money on you and try and treat you as best we within our capability you can do. The outcome is you give us as much time as you need to achieve the things that you want to achieve. We don't expect you to stay forever. It's great if you do. But if you don't, we want you to go out into the market and make it also easier for us to hire other folks.
And I think the same is true for your candidates, in the sense of this huge spectrum of candidates. There's people who are desperate to move, want a job tomorrow if they can get one, and that's fine. Lots of organisations are set up for that, so they'll publish their jobs and they'll wait for somebody to apply, and off they go. But there's this whole, and I think it's something like 70% of candidates are basically vaguely interested, but they're not wanting to move right now, or they can't see the right job right now.
Are they still called passive? Are they still called passive in this
model?
Well,
we talk about a spectrum. So basically, it's the spectrum moving from passive to active. But yeah, absolutely, they're people who are potentially interested in you as an organisation, but for whatever reason don't want to apply for a job right now. And at the moment, most organisations ignore them. And if they try to engage with them, they only talk the language of jobs, which is very boring for somebody who's a passive candidate. And if you're constantly bombarding them with jobs, they're just going to switch off. Whereas if you kind of say to them, look, we're interested in you. We want you to be interested in us. Tell us, do you want to move tomorrow, or are you just looking at the moment, and then adapt the engagement and adapt the experience for them to suit them rather than one size fits all.
Usual agency stuff, right? Things you do in agency. Well, you're taking that practice there that you would do, engage with them, find out a little about them. You're not like just sending them jobs.
Yeah, I love that, because I really do. I once was on a seminar of a leader that once said he interviews 10 people a month, every month, and he's not hiring. And he does this constantly, and his strategy was, from that, he will find the best people in the market, and he wants to stay close to those people, whether he's hiring or not right now. And he quite often offers coaching opportunities or one-on-one sessions if they just want some help in the day, because it helps him get to know them before they start. That always really resonated with me, that, and how you can turn that into, when it's not just one person you might need to hire, when you need to hire thousands, like Darren as an example.
And that, coming back to talk about, what drove the setting up of Hollaroo and what were the frustrations or the problems that we're trying to solve. Why do these intermediaries still exist? They exist because they're really good at building relationships. Why don't organisations do that? If you try and do it manually, it's really hard work. And if you're hiring just for a particular organisation, you've got to try and maintain a relationship potentially over years, because the number of roles you've got that will be suitable will be quite small. So it's always
and the person changes as well. right? That person also changes.
Absolutely, the person changes. So you've got this very long-term thing you have to do, and you just can't justify putting in the amount of resources that an agency does to keep those relationships going. So what we were trying to do is say, okay, can we use this nice new communication sharing technology to allow organizations to use technology to keep those relationships going, so it's much more cost effective and easy to do.
How do you get around the issue with agency? Well, in agency world, I remember as a recruiter, we weren't the best at updating the systems. When it talks about the relationship side, we can have those relationships, but it's the inputting into the system. How do you find out within TA now as well? The update, the community, the relationships they have, and then updating the systems.
Yeah, and again, the answer is putting it into the hands of the candidates to do, but in a way which understands where they are as well. Because if somebody is perfectly a passive candidate and you're constantly pestering them to fill in some long forms or give them the nth degree of detail about themselves, that doesn't make sense. They're just in a marketing relationship and they just need to know what's going on. But what you say is when they tell you that, okay, I'm ready to go, I'm really interested in working for you, that's when you go back to them and say, okay, we want to help you, so tell us what you're interested in, what you've been doing in the past, what sort of salary band you want, all of the stuff that's important for recruiting. The key is you ask for that information at the right point rather than right up front when they first sign up for you.
Is this focused more around the company signing up to build their community, or is this from an applicant's perspective saying, hey, I just want to develop and grow, and there's a few companies I'm interested in, I'm going to sign up and I want to be part of several communities that I'm really interested in?
So all of our systems are built around a particular organization. You
join Move's community.
ISS own their own community. Capgemini own their own, I'd say, community, multiple communities. Denton's own their own multiple communities. And it's, there's two things. One is, again, our starting point was we want them to realize the value of it. So they own everything within it. And then, obviously each organization wants to manage their people in different ways. So you want to give them the opportunity to, nobody knows they're on a Hollaroo platform. If you sign up to Denton's virtual work experience, you're in the Denton's space, all branded Denton's, all the messaging is Denton's.
I guess the value for the company as well, right, is that you aren't then building communities for others because of the work that Denton did.
Yeah,
it's still a good idea though, potentially. Explore later.
Long term. So again, going back to my early days, the idealistic vision of applicant tracking systems, one of the ideas was, why didn't organizations share more data? Because they could help each other out. And I think it was especially true. So the early systems I worked on were emerging talent, so graduate careers. And, let's say you've got 5 investment banks or whatever, they're all interested in the same sorts of people. So it's actually helpful for them to make it as easy as possible for the candidates to express their interest. Don't get them to fill out a 100-page form for each of the organisations. Start to share that information or whatever.
Yeah,
and it's interesting. I loved it. We had a different organisation responded in different ways. Some are very, very possessive and very, very, they want to ring fence everything and lock it all down. Others are more open-minded.
They don't want the companies to leverage their employer brand as well.
I mean, the one that really made me laugh was when I worked for iGrass. We had a client in France who refused to allow their divisions to share candidates between themselves. So these are divisions within an organisation. Basically said, no, somebody who's applied for this bit of the organisation, we absolutely don't want somebody from another part of the organisation to be able to see them.
That's so strange. I mean, I assume there's no centralized talent team in that argument at all, right? There's some, or each business is siloed on their acquisitions or
Sure,
whatever.
it
That's
still happens today,
Yeah.
I reckon.
I'm sure it does as well. I mean, if I think back to my Schlumberger days, Schlumberger grew by acquisition, and we had quite sort of fiercely independent brands within the group. And it was often quite hard to sort of say, no, you guys, we're all part of the same family. We need to cooperate and we need to share.
For us all to succeed, we need the best people in the right seat, right people, right seat.
Yeah, you can say that though, but they're like, but you can't say Chris. Yeah, we're keeping Chris.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the key challenges for internal mobility, because that's another big area that we focus on is you've got so many stakeholders. So rather than it being simple, one person's interested in a job, they apply and off they go. You've got that person, you've got their line manager, you've got the line manager that they're of the team that they're going to go to. So
it's the candidate's choice, everybody. If you're listening to this, it's nothing to do with us. We don't get to control where they want to be, right?
You'd be surprised. I think hiring managers have a bigger say than you think.
They have a say. They have a say, but the reality is, if the candidate wants to move, why do you control anything?
Well, and again, this comes back to the idea of people leaving and how you manage that. But even within an organisation, one of the things I think is, again, if you stick with the paradigm of open opportunities and people applying to them, and you try to do that for internal mobility, it's just not going to work because the timing's all very unlikely to be exactly right for all these people who are interested and involved. So if you think about it in a more fluid way about interests and relationships, you can say somebody who's interested in moving to this part of the organisation, they can connect up to it, they can start to learn more about it, find out what is actually working there, get to know the manager. And the point is, if that's happening at the same time as simultaneously people are expressing an interest in the bit of the organisation that person's already in, that manager will be slightly more relaxed about, yes, I'm fine with you, exploring opportunities in another bit of the organisation because I can see all the people who are interested in coming and working for me. So.
The reality in that environment is you gain a slightly more control, right? That's what you mean? Is from a HM's purview, you're like, I don't want to lose great people, and I've spent a lot of time coaching this person. But if I'm denying an outright request, I'm most likely going to lose that individual. Mm-hmm. It is one foot out the door. It's a verbal way of saying I'm not really enjoying this. I fancy something fresh.
You take the chance though. Sometimes as hiring managers, they do take a chance.
So strange,
yeah.
And I think from their perspective, I can understand because they're sitting there. The only thing they can see is the person they've already got. But if they could see, here's some people, and they don't necessarily have to be internal. You could show them a bit of the pipeline of people who are potentially interested in you in the future. That will give them a bit more comfort and reduce their nervousness about losing somebody because they can prove it.
How easy is to share that information? Because that's missing. Because normally, if you go to a system with a company, you have to use their enterprise system, like Oracle or SuccessFactors, and that doesn't have that information in there.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have access to
Hollaroo. That's why you get Hollaroo.
Use Hollaroo, yeah.
Absolutely. It's a really interesting track.
You mentioned a little bit about data and analytics because one of the things I'm really interested in is the more information you can get out of the people who are potentially interested in you about where they are on their journey or what have you, the more quality data you can give to, in this case, the hiring manager to basically say, we need to help this person develop their career because otherwise we're going to lose them. And we've got here, you can look at them, 5 people. We know that they're pretty much ready to go. They're interested. They're engaged.
Is that what you're partnering up with Foresight?
Yeah, well, Foresight's slightly different. So Foresight is about trying to predict future demand. Yeah. But it's also a really important metric because if you're looking at the health and quality of your talent pipeline, there's two bits. One is the quality of it, and then the other thing is the size of it, and the size of it compared to your predicted future demand. So what you want to see is, I'm looking after project managers. I know either Foresight's told me or I can work it out that I'm going to need 15 project managers in the next 12 months. So let's look at how many project managers I've got in my pipeline, and if the number's too low, I need to do a bit of work to expand that little bit of my pipeline. If it's fine, then I'm totally comfortable that I can fill my roles in the future.
I was thinking more, and there's a bit of a free plug-in for Danny, but I was talking more about the flight risk he talks about in his company. You're using that data, the flight risk information that there's someone might potentially be leaving.
It's all about trying to understand in advance the challenges that you're going to face as a talent acquisition team or what have you, and then how well placed you are to meet those challenges.
People economics, isn't it? Almost, it's like measuring demand versus supply, and
again, going back to my frustrations and why I set up Hollaroo was, it felt to me like we were at that stage, nearly 10 years into the applicant tracking system paradigm, where suddenly you had systems and data and what have you, and yet everybody was going, okay, I'm going to shut my eyes and then wait until a job gets published, and then go, oh my God, I need to find, project manager or what have you.
And you've got 2 hours.
Suddenly panic.
I'm going to shut my eyes for 2 hours.
That's how it's not pleasant for the candidate. It's not pleasant for the recruiter, because they're basically being shouted at by the hiring manager who's got a hole in the organisation. It's apart from being inefficient and costly and what have you, it's a pretty rubbish experience for everybody involved. So if you can use tools like Foresight to sort of try and get some early insights into the sorts of things you're going to need, and then use something like Hollaroo to say, in advance, I'm going to start anticipating that need and getting people ready to go.
The dream.
What's not to like?
Let me
Danny,
throw
if you're
out.
listening to the show as well, by the way, we need you on.
Come on, we need to keep.
No, and I've always said with Danny, Danny Foresight are one of our really good partners, just because there's this lovely synergy between the two concepts. So one's about understanding demand, and the other one's about meeting that demand. And if you put the two together, it's perfect.
Let me fire it out there to talent leaders on internal mobility. Hiring manager doesn't need to know if somebody wants to move teams. Thoughts on that? Just thought about it. Popped into my head.
I think they do. I'm all about openness and transparency, and I think having this slightly more, what's the word, adult conversation about because as you say,
when should they know then? When should the managers know?
So my take on it is, the worst time for them to know is when somebody's applied for another job, because that's sort of the
too early.
Pressures
I was going to say offer is probably the worst time where they're at offer stage.
Well, exactly. So I'm much more about, part of career development for everybody should be, where do you want to move within the organisation? And if they can say, I'm really interested in moving to this part of the organisation, if they've got the opportunity to explore that a bit and build some relationships and understand that part of the organisation as well, and you can feed in their development plan, say, okay, this is the sorts of things you need to learn and what have you. So doing all of that before the ticking clock has started, which is somebody applying for a role.
There's also nothing more energizing to people out in the world when your manager helps you realize a goal or achieve a dream, right? When you are said, I want to be in sales, but I've joined in, I don't know, user research or something. But I want to be in sales, but I'm here I thought it helped me learn the product. I can do the user research stuff. I want to be in sales. Then your manager goes, hey man, there's a great job for you, Darren, in the sales team. Would you mind if I put, is now a good time? Would you mind if I put my name in? I think for me is those little things, they always meant so much to me when I was employed in a role. I hated asking for pay rises, but when someone comes to me and offers me one, my God, I mean, I'm not leaving. I'm a company man. I'm not going anywhere. And I do believe companies don't do enough of that, right? They don't build that into their, is it delight? Like, think about those pure goals of individuals and then create delight in that action of saying, hey, I remembered you said this thing.
It's
Not
tricky
think about
though.
their own pain. The thing about their own pain is like, you were great in sales. I don't want to move you to product management. I don't care if you want to be in product management because you've sold more than anyone else this month. So you're going to have to wait. How long? When do I get to go to product management? It's what I joined for. In fact, there's another product role over there. I'm going to go apply for that. I might not get it, but I'm 1 foot out. And I think that's, I don't know.
Yeah, so you're asking the hiring managers to be proactive, because just like a pay rise, they give a pay rise, and that's proactive. It's difficult because if I was the employee and then managers say, "Oh, you should go and apply to this role," I've been thinking is, you want me out of this company? I want me out of this team.
Yeah, not if it's delivered well, right? And you've given the information over and said, "Hey, I want to be there."
Yeah.
Well, again, you know, and it goes back to our ethos is putting that control into the hands of the person. So rather than you saying to them, you know, we think you should go and be a product manager, you basically say to them, have a look at all the different opportunities that there are within the organization and what you need in order to move into one of those organizations. You tell us what you're interested in, and we will work with you to develop you for the right roles. We'll work with the two line managers on both sides to basically say when might an opportunity become available. How can we help the manager who's losing you, if you like, to backfill the role and what have you?
And what do they learn from having you that made you great part of the team, right? There might be a learning there. I always think it's fascinating. Whenever we start to unpack these challenges, we always go back to better coaching for the HM, right? If the HM knows earlier that that's the strategy and that's part of the development plan. But if you don't get these problems, like they say no, if the ones that are saying no, I think are the ones that don't understand.
Or who just don't have the support. Because I think you know, you can load it onto the hiring manager to have to think about all these different things, or you can say to them, you know, we want to help you to build your team, and building your team includes having people, you know, moving through the team, and in an ideal world, those people who are moving through the team, something else, are still staying within the organisation because you never know, they might come back at some point.
Because that's the people agenda. So making sure you've got people agenda built in at the hiring manager level, but also saying to that individuals like, hey, there might be people from sales that want to come here that, I don't know, we've shown or we've evidenced in the past. I guess maybe it's the Band-Aid rip, isn't it? But the first one, it's like, if you've had a pipeline of salespeople that have joined the product team, that have gone on to be, I don't know, engineers or whatever, because that was the journey that worked for them and you've got the evidence for it. I guess those hiring managers, they don't care then, do they? Because they're like, sales produces loads of product managers. And the engineering manager, like, I get loads of great people that used to be sales guys here that went into product management that became. So, it's fascinating.
It comes up again, doesn't it? I mean, we've done about a dozen of these shows and we talk about the coaching side or the training for the hiring manager. Adam Gordon's talking about recruiter enablement. Have you ever seen anyone talk about hiring manager enablement, having like a sort of SharePoint, so like a hub where they can get that information about the recruitment, about the training, about the managing their staff, internal mobility, just having that little hub there, they can deal with that. I mean, Adam's got like battle cards in there for recruiters. What about something for the hiring managers as well, around pay rises? Yeah,
the people strategy team have access. Fascinating. I know we're drifting away from Hollaroo here as well, Hugh. So apologies.
But this is, you know, basically it comes back to, you know, we're talking about internal mobility, and, you know, what's the problem? What are we trying to solve? And that's often going to be a mixture of training, data, understand, you know, removing that fear from the hiring manager, letting them see the potential people who are going to backfill the roles. You know, if you can get them comfortable, that, because their focus should be on their bit of the business working as efficiently as possible, and everything you add on top of that is distracting from that. But if you can say, we're going to support you in delivering to all of your performance metrics by making sure you've got the right people in place, and because every hiring manager will know that the 10 people or whoever in their team, they're not going to be the same 10 people in 5 years' time.
I don't know if every hiring manager knows that, Hugh. I don't know.
I think they fear it, So they fear because they've curated their team, they've found this wonderful set of people, and they kind of go, oh, I hope I don't lose anyone. But again, I think if you have the conversation with them about, and this maybe comes down to the training, that we've got to understand the real world. This is going to happen, but we're going to help you manage that and make it as seamless as possible, make the transitions as smooth as possible.
For me, that's an expectation on larger businesses. If they aren't like that, I'd be super surprised. But I work with a lot of startups, and of course, there isn't somebody. Even sometimes the HR folks that are in there are heavily operational and not maybe as strategic as that. But I agree with that. Maybe what Darren was saying, somewhere to get access to that information, or more community and more coaching, more training for HMs is definitely needed, because it's. Yes, I notice it a lot. Like, quite often I find HMs to be, not immature is the wrong term, but you know what I mean? Like, a bit early. Maybe they're young. Maybe they are, young managers. They've not been a manager for that long, and they think that the equity in their performance is all about, we keep using retention a lot. So when I'm not retaining people because they want to go to another team, am I failing? No, they're staying.
I mean, working with small, fast-growing organisations, the challenge there is less about retention. It's about the fact that you start off working with somebody who's working on their own, and then all of a sudden they need to hire a couple of people, and then all of a sudden they need to manage a bigger team.
And wear many hats.
Yeah, I was going to say, often they're wearing many hats anyway. Mm-hmm. So internal mobility at early stage is way more likely than it might be later on. Well, maybe there's more impact because that person's been there and has been an integral part of early growth, and now is all of a sudden not a product person, is a sales or whatever.
It's more developing people rapidly.
So Hugh, you wrote a white paper on how recruiters can do more with less. Can you summarise the findings of that report and what are the key takeaways?
Yeah, well, it was kind of fitting with the current times, where we're getting an awful lot of feedback that because of nervousness about the economy and what have you, the days of we're desperately trying to hire 1 million people and throwing money at the problem had gone. But simultaneously, if we asked people, they said, well, actually, I'm still hiring pretty much just about as many people and struggling to find just as many people. The issue is that I now have to do that without spending as much money. And I think the sort of point we're trying to make with the white paper is again going back to the starting point, which was the way in which recruitment was working was incredibly inefficient. It did deal with lots of intermediaries and what have you. There was value being lost left, right, and centre. So if you could just take a step back, use the slightly quieter time to take a step back and think more strategically about the way in which you were finding people and getting them into the organisation, and trying to eliminate some of that waste. That would simultaneously mean that you could answer the need of the organisation to spend less money in the short term, but also prepare you really well for the time when things do pick up. And rather than it going straight back up to being incredibly expensive, if you can get the right tools and processes and what have you in place, you can scale up again much more easily.
Nice. If for those of you that haven't read it so far, we'll make sure that there's a link to the downloadable. I assume it's available on the Hollaroo website, Hugh, where people can get access to that.
We did that. We did a webinar on that with another of our partners, which is Talent Sandbox. Cool. And that was sort of combining tools but also training, basically upskilling the team.
Is that John?
No, it's Neil.
Don't know Talent Sandboxes, then apologies. We'll
cut I'll send you a link later. But it's addressing. So there's another sort of, and again, this is nothing to do with Hollaroo, but it's one of the things that my sense of the talent acquisition space and what have you is, we're really missing great training materials and great learning, and not. I don't want to use the word certification, but basically, we should be a profession. We should be. My wife is a vet. and so she did her training at university, and every year vets are constantly doing continuous training,
Accreditations or
continue
whatever. Yeah.
skills development. They can't keep their license if they're not continuously learning. And I think talent acquisition professionals should have the same mindset and should be constantly learning and constantly
license to hire.
Nice.
Yeah.
Bond. I also think I've always thought that there must be a part of like something like a CIPD, maybe because we all work very closely with HR teams. There is a part of it that is HR training or some sort of accreditation. My business partner constantly talks about how the route into TA for most was I got given a phone and a book and I got on with it. And agency world. Although funny enough, I was going to write a post this morning about how I'm noticing an era of talent people that weren't in agency first, which I think is fascinating. We'll talk about another time. But I thought that's fascinating. The professional era of TA is what I was thinking of talking about, because I agree with you. There needs to be a standard.
And the interesting thing is, people fall back on their backgrounds and what they've done in the past, and rather than learning from people, you mentioned it. The industry is full of people from all sorts of different backgrounds, and you kind of learn by osmosis at the moment. And maybe you meet somebody or listen to something, and that's quite interesting. Might try that out. And I think perhaps starting to formalize it a bit and be a bit more proactive about learning and adapting, and because the industry. So again, I've been in it for a while, but it's there's large elements of it which, if I'm honest, have just stayed completely the same, and yet simultaneously some of the tools and the marketplace has completely changed. Candidate expectations are completely different from how they were when we first started. So,
but your point is the people in it maybe aren't necessarily evolving in the same direction at all times,
and maybe just don't have access to that. And again, so there's access to it, there's incentives to do it, and I think you're absolutely right. In the HR generalist space, there is this at least attempt to have qualifications and accreditation and what have you. And I personally think that having something similar within the talent acquisition space.
Shout out to Joe at Purple, who's just launched an element of that. Maybe it's not a standard or certification, but he's definitely attempting to create a baseline of peer-to-peer. Is peer-to-peer fair, Darren?
Peer-to-peer learning, I think that's,
and he's just recently created a certificate of the performance on the platform, which is the e-learning platform. And I agree, there are a few tools that are starting to,
there are. It'd be nice to involve a bit of evaluation though in there. Imagine, actually you're getting on a call, you're sourcing, or someone's watching you and evaluating. I'd love to see some of that as well happening. Someone kind of gives you that grading and just pointing out like this is where you could do better. Just like both of us worked in an agency, you had a mentor who'd always be there right at the beginning, sort of checking in and making sure that you're making the right calls and sending the right emails. That's got
really difficult since we've gone remote as well.
It is really hard.
Having had a team of 65 recruiters last year, we were reflecting with my business partner on like how we would have coached our teams when we had teams in office, and we realised the burden of that is now a full-time role here. Like having an in-house trainer for that kind of stuff or a program for it has never been a far greater need. When we just learned by listening to other people. But how do you listen to other people when they're not in the same room? That's super fun. For me, it's been the most exciting development in our business to start working on that stuff, because that produces content which makes sales, which makes us better at our work, which means we hire more people and we learn more. So that mechanism of like documentation, learning, coaching it, training it, putting it into practice, testing it, getting out to market, winning more. You know what I mean? I find super interesting. And I agree with you.
And again, going back to the difference between the agency world and the corporate world is, you can see that gives you a competitive advantage. And it's interesting how there seems to be less of a recognition of that in-house, and everybody, the candidate marketplace is incredibly tight. If you don't, put your best foot forward and represent the organisation well, you're going to struggle to hire, aren't you? So
It's interesting.
Okay.
Although I do also want to embrace as a room full of, actually, I'm sorry, I might even be, because it sounds like Darren, did you say you were an analyst for a bit
I was, yeah.
in
An
a
analyst.
previous world? I'm probably the only lifer who joined an agency at, I think, 19, 20, and then I've done nothing else in my working career. Actually, I was a roofer for a little bit. But I agree with you that, like, I think the stage at which I think was what makes talent teams, what makes talent people great, is that I could certainly see, Hugh, when you were talking earlier, as like that you've got a product mindset with it. The way even you delivered the process with data and stuff, you could totally see how what your background has influenced your learning for that. Mine, of course, came from agency and sales. I'm the sales guy here, but I'm a talent guy. I think that's one of the beautiful things about our industry, is that we do have lots of different ways of thinking, but also I do agree with you. There needs to be like things like ghosting. We need to just know that as a standard, that is a terrible practice and needs to go, right? You don't deserve the right to be in talent acquisition if you're ghosting candidates that are in process. To me, like that's our professional integrity, isn't it? That particular element to it. So there are some things that I do agree need a standard, particularly internally, particularly as we want to develop our skills to affect the business more broadly, and not just be a cost center, like a reduction cost center service. You know what I mean? That we are just easily got rid of. If we do want to develop into other areas, then I do think we do need a bit more coaching, not just in HR. I think marketing, sales. I think there are other areas that heavily influence what we do, depending on where you sit, particularly if you're sourcing or a partner or whatever, like whatever position you're in. But fascinating, and I'm sure we could go on for hours.
Yeah, just
Sure.
another point just about the recruiting in times of need and what have you is taking a step back and saying, me as a recruiter, what's my role in the organisation? And people will say, okay, well, it's to read a bunch of applications and eventually give somebody an offer. I wonder whether we should be thinking, our role is to deliver the talent that the organisation needs to succeed, and delivering talent means the time when somebody walks in the door rather than when I think my job is finished. And that's why I think it's very important. One of our I think Darren, you asked, where does it begin, where does it end? We think it's important to keep that experience going after somebody's accepted an offer, because it feels like it's becoming more and more important to organisations, and more of an issue is that they think they've hired somebody, and then on the day they're supposed to walk in the door, they don't.
You know what, Hugh? It's also a thing that super fascinates me about the way talent seems to work as well, right? If you look at any other unit in an org, you will nigh on see handoffs and crossover before, I don't know, let's say engineering or design is fully responsible for something. There will be a period for which there needs to be tight handover, and that those two teams working super closely. Yeah, in talent, quite often I agree with you. It's like we go, cool, they've signed. HR, you're going to deal with that, right?
Yeah.
Onboarding team, you've sent that email already, right? Cool, I'm good. I'll just say hi on day one. But actually, for me, like if I genuinely want to affect QRH, those handoffs are the most important part. If quality of hire is something that we are genuinely going to track over time and create purpose for TA, I genuinely think that those handoff moments are where the points of failure happen. And with TA, I think where we hand off and give up is like onboarding or pre-onboarding to onboarding success and an understanding of the role. To me, is a super. For me, I've always been fascinated in making sure that anybody we place has that done perfectly. I want to know what is onboarding, because I can start now. I can start giving them access to some of that information now. What does it look like? How long is it going to be? I get asked these questions in the process. Sure, how am I judged at the end of probation might be a bit out of my wheelhouse. And coaching and stuff like that, that's definitely something I don't control. But I think there's parts of that, particularly with QRH, there's parts of the funnel that we control and don't control.
Becomes much more of a team effort, I reckon.
Right, it should be.
Basically, everybody's got an input, and I think too often it's all siloed, and you get handed from pillar to post. And Darren, you made the point about you've used one system for this, and now you've got to use another system. It's all discontinuous, and
chaos. Hugh, before we like to move on to the end of the show, we like to ask everybody that's here, like we've talked a lot about tools that you're partnering with, and we might be catching you off guard a little bit here. Sorry if we are, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What tools are you seeing in the market that is making a big impact at the moment? Maybe they're not launched yet, they're in beta, or what are you seeing? We want to know, first of all, so we can pipeline great guests for the show, but also get your view on like what's coming downstream. What are you seeing that's like everybody should know about?
A lot of noise about AI, and interesting. So there's two sides of that. I mean, I'm a cynic. I'm an engineer. If people talk about AI, I tend to sort of slightly roll my eyes and think, oh my goodness, that's ridiculous. I do think so. So from our perspective, I think the things we can do with machine learning as opposed to AI and putting data and understanding relationships between data points better, because you can use tools to help understand those relationships. That's really, really powerful. And I think that one thing I'm really quite excited about is because we have so much interaction and so much richness of data, we've got this lovely, great data set that we can use some of those tools with to
who have you seen
get answers. But I wanted to, this might interest you, is I was at an event last week, started talking to an organization, and I can't remember what the name is, but I'll send it to you. They're literally just starting, and their idea is it's all about augmenting people and going back to your environment of building relationships with candidates. What they want to do is use things like ChatGPT to sort of automate some of that candidate interaction and let people scale the personalized experience, getting away from the idea of ghosting and what have you. Because I think at the moment, if you can give people the tools to make that easier and make it more driven by technology, that might be one of the answers to solving the silence and ghosting that's happening. So that was really interesting. I haven't even seen it yet. I'm going to hopefully see it towards the end of this week. But yeah, that was the first thing I think I'd heard where I thought, yeah, that could work really well.
Nice.
Because simultaneously I was hearing things like, yeah, we'll use ChatGPT to write our job descriptions. Okay, what are you going to train it with? Existing job descriptions. Okay, so basically all you're going to do is
bias job descriptions.
Do the same
rubbish job descriptions.
Yeah.
Steve Levy said that to me once. He was like, when I had a brief call with him, or did we meet for a beer? I can't remember how we did it, but he said AI is, without the understanding of what is training the AI, you have no way of controlling. You're always going to be exposed. And ChatGPT is everything, which actually makes it maybe worse because it has all the examples.
I think that my big issue with lots of the ideas of the learning models and what have you is we know what we do is not particularly good at the moment. So the data that we'll be using to train these wonderful tools and what have you is based on an inherently flawed model.
It's a low bar, isn't it, already?
How's that going to work?
Yeah.
It's
fascinating. Give us one logo. Give us one logo that you've seen in the market that you think I'm impressed with them.
Let me try, and I'm going to find the name of this organisation because, like I say, they're
Love
really
a shout
young.
out of a fresh one.
But yeah, give them a shout out.
Interesting. Thank you as well. Thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of this week's show. Thanks so much, Hugh, for joining us. Of course, we're going to jump on the demo in a second. So if you're listening to this, don't forget to head over to YouTube. We'll put a link in the description where Hugh's going to show us a quick look at Hollaroo, and me and Darren are going to ask a couple of questions. But that brings us to the end of this week. Thanks so much, Hugh, for joining us.
Thanks, Hugh. Thanks very much. Come.